All right, Ryan Noonan is here, my good friend and colleague over at Betsperts Golf, responsible for many of the brilliant day-by-day advances that you see over at the Rabbit Hole, our proud data partner over at Inside Sports Network. Ryan, thank you for joining me, man, on such short notice. We were just having a brief conversation before we went hot on the struggles of parenting and children. And I know our guy Ron is struggling through a bunch of sick kids at the moment. We'll get him back in the mix here shortly. But happy Monday, man. Happy Sony week.
Yeah, excited to be here again. Thanks for having me. Super stoked to, I'd say, watch from afar, but not really. I'm in the Inside Sports Network Discord. I'm getting to see some of the inner workings as a new young CEO gets his bearing and figures out how to do this. But I'm super stoked for you and excited to see what's to come, and excited that me and my team can be a part of that, even in a small way.
A huge part of that. I made the whack-a-mole joke to you again before we hit record about just like, it's going amazing. Don't get me wrong. Like, this has always been my dream, and I have been building towards this in my career for the last 5 years. So to see it come to life has been, my proudest accomplishment and achievement in my career to date. And I have been overwhelmed and incredibly humbled by the response. We flew through all of my initial projections, but at the same time, they do not prepare you at all for like what I would call mini fires that you just have to keep putting out on a day-to-day basis, which I'm sure that you're familiar with over at Betsperts, right? And that's one of the things I wanted to, talk about with you a little bit. But some of the changes that you guys have made with Betsperts that Ron and you guys have walked us through in the upcoming year, I am super, super pumped about, notably the course pages. So maybe we start there.
Same. So we go back and think about really to the world, to your audience, I would say, the last year was really our first year in the space.
Yeah.
That is not the reality whatsoever, but because it takes a very long time to get something like this off the ground, to have some of the, the visions and to start to, wireframe out some of what do we want this to look like? How could we possibly create, a better mousetrap, knowing that there are, other things out there in the data space that I think us, along with, a lot of your listeners and subscribers, were like, hey, we want this, but we want it to be super intuitive. We want it to be functional. And our goals have continued to be like, okay, well, we're hearing that people like this part, but they use X site for this, and they use this other site for this. And it's like, well, we want all those things too. So how do we prioritize? What do we need to do first? And then eventually, over the course of maybe 3-4 years, have everything. And have everything in a way that is, I think, maybe easier to navigate than other places. And then, as we've talked about from the jump when we first started to partner, have it all be accurate. And again, such a low threshold, you would think, but
that wasn't there in the past.
Wasn't there, right? So, that was the goal, right? Is how can we keep everyone and make it really easy? Because I think we find that even, more so than anything else. And again, I'm part of a bigger infrastructure at Betsperts Media Group, where we have 4 for 4 on the football side, and DLF, Dynasty League football, where I think a lot of people in the fantasy industry, even in betting on football, people want picks. I'm also a part of it, really, it's my favorite part of what we do is our football Discord and our betting Discord. I absolutely love that. People want some of the why, but I found like I'll write this really elaborate write-up on a prop, and someone will immediately ask a question that was definitely in the write-up. They just want the picks. The golf community, more so than anything, wants some more data. They like to do a little bit more of their own stuff. And I think that's why we've had the success that we've had right away.
Yeah. And I think you did exactly what I did with Inside Sports Network, right? Is like, you just saw an opening, like through my 5 years doing this freelancing. I was like, gosh, there is an opening here for a community of people that are really smart and really informed listeners that have been listening and following my content for now 5 years now. they want a community at a affordable price where they can all come together and talk golf and cut through the bullshit and have access to like the best information, but also be part of like a really fun hang and
Mhm.
community. And with BetSperts, it was like, hey, there's all these data sites out there, and you would think this is a very low bar to clear, but like some of the most popular data sites are just incorrectly putting courses into different filters. Like you click on Pebble Beach and it's like, okay, that's not a Bermuda golf course. Okay. And so all of these people are being led astray based on incorrect data modeling. First of all, that's already a huge edge for us, right? Like if
Yes.
everybody's using this outdated, and I've been saying this now for a while, it's like, okay, if you're not using the rabbit hole for your models are just out, like we just already have an edge over you if you're modeling with the rabbit hole. And you were just like, hey, I think people want this, and there is an immediate need for it, and it's been one of the great pleasures of my career watching it grow and watching it come to life with you and playing a small part, hopefully at least a small part in
An
helping its
increasingly large
visibility.
part, right? An
Yeah,
increasingly large.
helping its visibility like become what I believe to be it will be if it isn't already a place that you just need. Like you just if you don't have it, you're giving up an edge. And I am pretty confident that we're already there. And I think the other thing that made you guys such a obvious fit with me and my community is that I love that like you guys are committed to user feedback.
Mhm.
Okay. And I know that sounds like a very low bar to clear, but trust me, as somebody who has spent years emailing other data sites about how they need to do this differently and them just not responding or not caring, the fact that I have a direct line to you guys and can be like, hey, like my subscriber gave this really good idea. And everybody in the Discord feeling like they're part of a family, right? And not just like they're speaking into a void with some giant corporation and people that run it are unreachable and not golf betters and don't care and don't want to hear you. Like that is huge for me. That's really important for me because that was one of the things I modeled at ISN is like, I want this to be, if you sub and are part of this, like your family, right? Like I'm going to invite you to play my golf courses. Like I'm going to treat you like family. If you have questions, I'm going to put thought and care into answering them. And I
Mhm.
think that's probably outside of just the data. Like I think Betsperts is kind of, trust me, this will be the end of our infomercial and we'll talk Sony, but that's the other thing that I wanted to pat you on the back for.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, we have that, right? We have the, some of the team that does some of that stuff, but that's important for us too, is right to be the deliverable content arm of this, because I think we both know that modeling, the term modeling, sometimes if you open the rabbit hole, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So we want to make it user friendly. How can we properly articulate what we're looking to do with this mound of data, which can be massive? So making sure that we understand and kind of lead people in a way that makes it a little bit more, attainable for them and helps them build better betting cards, build better DFS player pools. And yeah, I appreciate all that at the top.
Well, I think personally, I think the product sells itself, which is not going to stop me from talking about it every single week. But it just to reiterate, Inside Golf gets you 25% off on the rabbit hole. We would love to have you as part of that team and play around with it. Again, I'm super reachable in the Discord if you have any questions about modeling. And if you are somebody that doesn't want to model, you have a full-time job and you can only devote an hour or two a week into golf content. I think one of the best parts of the rabbit hole too is like if you want to take that route and just copy my model or copy Twitterless Steve's model, you could just do that too. Like you could just see all of our experts models, Ron's model. We just added Twitterless Steve, who is like one of the sharpest betters in our community's model. So something for everyone, whether you want to really take the time to like learn and educate yourself and do your own research or just follow someone else's research, it's all there. So, anyway, Sony, man, Any wide-ranging macro thoughts on Sony?
A lot. I love this event.
Me too.
I part of it is like, yeah, I've had success, but I've also had like tortures. I think
Yeah.
I've had I landed the plane with Siwoo in
Yeah, me too.
2022. All right, excellent. 3 of the 4 years, otherwise, I've had the runner up. So I had Neiman back in '01. And then I always go to the well with Russell Henley. It's one of my favorite losers. When Russell got chased down by Decky, I had that. And then last year felt like everyone had Benny Ann. I'm such a Keegan guy.
I had
Like,
Keegan. Yeah.
nice. Okay. So we've been on it. This is good. That's
Yeah.
good. All right. So we got there with Siwoo. We had Keegan. Yeah. It's so part of it is like the way I like to model, I think lends itself really well to this place. The course history piece of it is really interesting. I'm not a huge course history guy, but I do think there's some interesting corollary courses maybe we can discuss if that's something that you think is valuable here this week. I think it's interesting to see how it's played differently over the years, especially if we are going to get some wind this week, which looks like might be the case. I think our new course pages show that really well, because you do get the 2020 year where we did have wind in there when it was only 11 under with Cam Smith. So because I do think there are some, I don't know, it's not lazy necessarily, but I think you're going to hear some commonalities in how this place is handicapped and described this week, which is kind of evolving into a different thing. But I don't know if the wind is a great equalizer for how it plays out this week.
No, I'm 100% with you. And that was actually one of the things I talked a little bit about on my Sunday podcast, is that I think that this somewhat gets mismarketed as a golf course like Harbor Town, when it really is more of a kind of total driving golf course, where we saw it last year. Grayson Murray and Benny On, probably the largest reason why they were able to find themselves towards the top of the leaderboard, at least via strokes gain, is like Benyon was number 1 off the tee last year, and Grayson Murray was number 2 off the tee last year. Benyon led in driving distance, and Grayson Murray was top 25 in both driving distance and driving accuracy. And I think we see this with a lot of PGA Tour golf courses, where in 2019 or in 2018, they weren't looking at some of those bunkers and saying, well, I can carry this and just hit a wedge out of the rough. But now in 2024, 2025, like, these guys are playing more aggressively off the tee. It's easier to yield an advantage with the driver. Now, the thing that's interesting is you look at the Cam Smith year in 2020, where I think he won at 11 under par, and we saw conditions that might, in terms of wind, that might be similar to this week. That actually caused players with the win to have to club down more, because they had to, and it shows Betsperts does a phenomenal job with this. You look at the course page and it has something called driver usage, and you see in 2020, the driver usage shrank because it was windy out there. It was harder to control your golf ball. So guys are having to say, like, gosh, this is a more strategic golf course now. I can't necessarily carry this fairway bunker in the wind. I have to try and find the fairway at all costs. So does that change at all how you're thinking about it this week? Because I think for me, the number one thing that I am saying when I'm looking at the wind is a little bit less emphasis on putting than I normally had, because I think we're going to get a lower greens and regulation percentage, and kind of more of an emphasis on like total tee to green play, right? Who has control over their golf ball off the tee, whether that's through distance or accuracy or total driving. I think this week, in terms of off the tee, I would rather have you be above average at both than maybe like a lead at one of the two. I think it's a great golf course like Grayson to just be like a great total driver on. And, you know, a little bit more emphasis on around the green play with a lower greens and regulation percentage. And then, you know, Ryan, whether it's windy or not at the Sony, the biggest characteristic of this golf course that always jumps off the page for me is that amount of shots between 125 and 200 yards. I mean, 9 of the 12 par fours play under 460 yards, but over 360 yards. So at the end of the day, like, the easiest roadmap to success here, whether it's calm or a little more windy, is always going to be middle iron play. right? And that's why you see Russell Henley and Ben Griffin and Corey Connors at the top of my model this week.
Yeah, it's hard not to. And I think having the course metrics now on the the core stats sheet is able to actually kind of validate some of like our thoughts around what that actually looks like in terms of the distribution. I know it's something that I've heard you in previous shows where, especially if we go to courses that we haven't been to, that's stuff that you're trying to map out by hand.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get ahead of that type of stuff for us. So yeah, I mean, total driving, I think I always like to build a hybrid version of that because partially, obviously it's a flawed stat. I think it's a very useful stat, but when you're combining basically two rank stats to create third rank is great. I also am a big, anyone that will listen to any content that I do, I'm very down on driving accuracy. I almost never. It is a binary yes, no stat that doesn't tell us anything that we're really actually trying to gauge from the stats. Because you being 3 inches off into the first cut is the same as hooked into the woods, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is yes, no. Whereas distance from the edge of the fairway, distance from the center of the fairway, stats that we have on the rabbit hole tell you a way better story about what you're actually trying to do. So anytime I'm using total driving, I just don't use the total driving stat. I just do a hybrid and weigh it differently depending on what I think the need is. And I think that that's a beauty of the rabbit hole anyway, too, is because instead of it just being 50-50, I can still determine if it's a little bit more accuracy than it is distance. And I just think it's a way, way better way to do that. That matters, I think, a ton for us, what we're trying to do.
I love that too, because what you can even do too with that is you can kind of get granular with it and compare them side to side instead of seeing a cumulative ranking. Yep. So like you could look at distance from the center of the fairway or distance from the edge of the fairway, which, I don't even think a lot of sites are modeling with that type of accuracy in terms of like, okay, let's really get in the weeds here with what being an accurate player means. And then if you want to say, okay, who has that Grayson Murray combination of they're also long, and so if it gets windy on a hole and it's playing downwind and you want that guy that has the carry distance to be able to carry that bunker, but also the accuracy to kind of weave one down the center of the fairway and kind of hit it a little bit tighter with their dispersion patterns in terms of you're not as much worried about the giant mess. Being able to compare those side to side, I think is super, super valuable. I love that. Anything else golf course related before I ask you about the top of the board?
No, nothing in particular. The putting thing is interesting. I like you hearing that. I typically will lean less putting than probably most people when they model. I do think there are obviously weeks like last week where, it needs to be heavier than normal. I'm trying something this year a little bit with my modeling with putting. It sounds like such a, humble brag. It's really cool getting to, get the ability to go to these golf courses and, get credentialed and sit in these conferences and get to talk to the guys on the course is really, really cool. I went to the Wyndham this year and got some time with Spieth, which was awesome.
How's he doing, man? I thought this would have been a good place for him to give it a shot if he was healthy.
Back. Yeah. Obviously probably not healthy yet, but I was just talking to them about data. That was the discussion I was having with everyone I talked to that week was just around, hey, we spend so much time in the weeds here on this. What do you think matters? What is part of like your team's research in terms of, putting splits and stuff like that? Spieth, one of the big things that he said that he really believes in is that he'll look at like agronomy splits for like around the green. So he cares more about around the green chipping on Bermuda than he does putting, which I thought was really interesting. Like I don't hear most people in our space talking about modeling around the green on Bermuda. It's just around the green and then you putt on Bermuda. He said that if he's rolling it well, he doesn't really care. So he's dialed in. So I would push back and say, I think anything data wise on the tails makes a ton of sense. If we have a 5-year history of you being a really good high above your baseline Bermuda putter, whether you believe it or not, you're probably a better Bermuda putter. But to his point, if I'm just a good putter, then I think there could be some noise in those sample sizes. So when I'm modeling putting this year, I'm doing both. I will get a baseline strokes gained putting or whatever I'm doing with the putting split. And then I will do a grass specific, like in this instance, Bermuda putting, and try to weigh them specifically, that depending on what I think matters this week. So I'm also trying to do maybe strokes gained short game around with Bermuda,
Yep.
or, around the green with Bermuda, thinking of it a little bit differently, because Jordan Spieth said that, and it probably does make some sense, right? So just trying to think of how can I evolve in my knowledge from what these guys think matters in terms of building better models.
I love that too. And particularly in terms of chipping, like I travel to play a lot of golf
Yeah.
courses throughout the year. I spend a lot of time going to different parts of the country to play different golf courses. And I mean, whenever I go down to the Southeast, I was just in the Southeast in November playing off of non-overseeded Bermuda, which is very different from the agronomy that I face when I play the vast majority of my golf in either the New York, Westchester area or Los Angeles. You have to mold your chipping technique, right? Like it's a different animal. And in fact, a lot of these players change their wedges based on what type of around the green agronomy that they're facing. It's honestly an entirely different beast. So that's another, like that's really interesting to hear Spieth talk about that, because my experience with players is a bit of a mixed bag. It doesn't surprise me that Spieth, who's, has been on the tour for 5-10 years now, has a little bit more insight into it. Some of the younger players that I talked to are like, holy shit, I had no idea that you were going this in depth with it. Tell me more. I didn't even know. But that's great. That's another thing you do at the rabbit hole, is like the specific around the green filters. And to bring it back to Sony, it's a Bermuda grainy. You saw guys get tripped up with the around the green stuff at Kapalua too. It's just a little bit of different piece. The other thing with putting, I would add to what you mentioned about putting, one of the things I love to look at is the putting ranges. So like, for example, putting 5 to 15 feet is really, in my opinion, the best metric of how good of a putter you are. And I'll tell you why, because there's a lot more variance and randomness in the manipulation of making a long putt and how that correlates to your strokes gained putting. So you could miss a bunch of 7-footers and then make 2 35-foot putts at the end of your round, and it looks like you had an amazing day, where at the end of the day, those 7-footers are really the ones that are going to matter more often going forward. And so what I like to look at is I look at a ton of, almost every week, I look at last 50 rounds, who have been the best from 5 to 15 feet. Because at the end of the day, that is where the majority of your putts are going to come from. That is what the skill separator is going to be on most golf courses, right? Most golf courses on the PGA Tour, particularly a golf course like Waialae, where you're going to have a fair amount of wedges, and a lot of guys on a lot of holes are like, okay, short iron to 15 feet, who's going to make the putt? Who's going to miss the putt? The guy who makes the putt is going to be the last man standing at the end of the week. So I think that 5 to 15 foot zone is really, really informative to me in terms of like week to week stickiness. Does that track for you?
Yeah, right. It's the same. We're trying to pick winners, or we're trying to build, guys that can make birdies and bunches in the DFS standpoint. Like, you need birdies. You have to kind of look for some of those, outcomes. You can't be looking at kind of like median averages for guys too. You make a great point with how strokes gained is done. There's definitely, some flaws in that can, just if you're looking at it, the big picture can mask some of that stuff. So yeah, that's the scoring range that you want. That's the guys that are going to be, the winners are making the 30-footers and the majority of their 7-footers, right? So I've noticed that as a trend. I will open, the ability to open up your model every week and look at it. Is something that I've seen some of the more of the putting ranges on there more consistently. So it's definitely something I'm going to look at moving forward.
A good example of this, and this is the last thing I'll say because it can transition us into talking about the actual players at the Sony, but a good example of this is Corey Connors finished top 5 last week at Kapalua. And I was not on Corey Connors. I thought, okay, let me wait till Sony week, a golf course that more emphasizes driving accuracy, that isn't an extreme putting contest with the massive, massive greens and regulation percentage. And I went and looked at my Sony model this week and went back and looked at my Kapalua model this week. And Corey Connors was like making a lot of 5 to 15 footers over the past 6 months, which really surprised me and something I hadn't quite noticed. And then what do you know? He opens up the year and gains over 7 strokes putting at Kapalua. And you look at it in Kapalua and it's like, no, this wasn't a luck box thing. Like if you really paid attention to the data there, things were showing that Corey Connors is like really starting to improve his putting. And this might be something that's a little stickier long-term going forward. And again, maybe that transition us to talking about the top of the board of like, that's an example of a guy that by looking at that putting from 5 to 15 feet, you can be like, wow, this Corey Connors putting thing, we may have to give it a little bit more credit than we're used to.
I love that. And the ability to look at it, then you're talking about it. I'm like, wow, I want to look at that. I want to grab a bigger sample size, roll it off of, download that into a CSV, try to get a baseline, and then look at some more recent form to get a sense of maybe who's spiking. So that's definitely after the show project for sure. So yeah, I mean, that's a great call out. I mean, we know putting could be noisy and there could be variance, but also guys just improve, right? Guys improve their baseline. And, when someone like Corey Connors does that, where everything else is so insanely consistent, and, just really strong, all of a sudden he gets closer to a baseline tour average putter, then there's going to be weeks where he's absolutely worth his price in a less than stellar field near the top of the board.
Big time. So because I want to do a little bit of NFL. I want to hear a few final opinions on Wildcard Weekend from you at the end. So where do you want to start? Have you made any bets this Monday morning? Are you an early Monday morning better where you're going out and trying to get the best number? Do you kind of like to let things simmer, take in a little bit more content, figure things out as the week goes on, and then wait to pounce? But where are you at on this Monday early afternoon in terms of your betting card and strategy?
I don't have the ability to accept the worst of the number. And not even the worst of the number, but like not the best number. And I wish I did sometimes, but I am 1,000% a Monday morning open line guy. It's being in the content space. I feel like I am the content. I feel like I have the tools. I will take in content as the week goes on when I'm trying to make, finishing position bets or look for matchups or stuff like that. But in terms of outrights, having the ability, thanks to you now that we have the field loaded on Friday evenings.
That was a big push for me. And I think people are happy with it.
I love it. I love it. It was going to be an execution standpoint, but we got a guy to write a script, pull it. We go and validate to make sure it's correct. It gets updated every couple of hours between Friday night and Thursday to tee off in case there's any update. So now that I have that access, I'm trying to model right away. Maybe not, Friday night, but pretty early. And then from there, price sensitive wise, I typically will have an idea of who my targets are going to be. I have no range of probabilities that I'm actually capping out where I think the guy is going to be. But if I have an idea of like, all right, I think that, the range for this guy is going to be between here and here. If it's there or better, I will fire on it. So I have a 5-man card all ready to go for Friday. And mostly guys I thought I was going to bet on this week because I just it's a combination of guys I love to bet on, or, in some instances, guys I want to be maybe a little bit early on, and guys that really fit in the model. And I went back and I didn't add wind to my model, but I looked before and just looked at wind all of itself. And I didn't want any of the guys that I was considering to be poor in the wind. So they all check that box too. So if we get more wind information, maybe Wednesday I'll update a model, get a second iteration, but I feel pretty good about where I'm at.
I'm with you. I do the same thing. Like I like to do, and I have to do this because, I record my pod on Saturday evenings. So I have to do the lion's share of a lot of my research between Friday night and Saturday night. And I love being able to do all the work between like Saturday every single week. And my girlfriend is keen to point out that this is not normal or optimal in the happiness department often, but
Yep.
Saturday is my biggest work day of the week because it's going through the rabbit hole model and writing my big article, and figuring out the guys that I'm going to talk about on the weekend podcast. And again, that podcast for me has been a career changer for me in terms of like getting the information out first.
Yep.
That podcast does better for me than any other content I put out. So I think people really like to like get all of the stuff done. And then you wake up on Monday morning and you can be like, oh, these are the guys I like. These numbers are different than the numbers that I would have expected. Click, click, click. Okay, we're done. So I left one spot available for somebody in the 30 to 50 range, but I've made a couple bets as well. So talk me through them. Give me your guys.
So if, Betsperts Golf subscribers would know there's not many times where the guys at the top of the board, I was hoping maybe one would trickle into the 30s. We didn't quite get there, but I also the FOMO too in outright betting, Andy, I know you could speak of. If you have a guy that you back or a guy who's in your model, or you were even kind of considering him, and then Thursday afternoon you see him right up there in the top of the leaderboard, like I can't live with the FOMO. I'd rather overextend a little bit, feel like I have myself covered and I have my guy. So I've been a long time Russell Henley guy.
Let's do it.
So I paid the 22. I actually am okay with the 22.
Yeah. Me too.
I thought we might see like 16, 18 across the board with some shorter.
Me too.
I was really okay that we had 20s for sure. I don't know. Yeah, you know what? I've probably held the ticket for every time that it was heartbreaking and brutal and he couldn't close and all those things. And winning golf tournaments is really hard. I just think if you just keep putting yourself in position with the skill set that he has, over time, you're going to get rewarded. And we've seen him, I think, evolve into a better golfer than maybe people think over what we've seen in the last 2 years. Going to big boy golf courses and contending, like Augusta, Pinehurst.
Dude, he led the Open Championship in windy conditions, I might add, in ball striking. Okay.
I know I had the ticket.
Me too. I had the big 150 to 1 or whatever it was.
Yes.
And it was like, gosh, Russell Henley, if he'd make any of these putts, like he could win the Open Championship. You can't fake your way into that.
No. And all the agronomy pieces here, obviously Southeast guy and the Bermuda, less than 200-yard wedges, though. Again, that's our irons. That's improving for him too. But again, he's going to keep the ball in play, distance from the edge of the fairway. All those things are in play for Henley. I'm going back to the well on Keegan. I mean, I kind of wanted 30. I thought we might not have it.
I love Keegan too. I thought we were going to get 35, to be honest with you.
Yeah. 25 was expensive, but like, again, that's the one that more so than anything, I can't not have. If I was to say, I think I'm a fanboy of my bets more so than anything, but if I was actually a true just fan, Keegan Bradley, I'm a New Englander. That's Keegan. The coolest interaction I had at the Wyndham was getting like 10 minutes of Keegan's time, which was just an insane fanboy conversation about golf data and the Ryder Cup and all of it was awesome. So just, if I think that Keegan's a fit, I'm a fanboy, I'm a minute. But look, again, total driving, irons from the ranges we're talking about, spike putting, which you can really see in the rabbit hole when guys can get into that 5 to 15 and start to make some stuff.
Yep.
Keegan at 25 was, again, probably a little shorter, but it was the tax I'm willing to pay. I want to get your thoughts on Luke Clinton.
Yeah.
How are we feeling about?
I've got thoughts.
Okay.
I bet it. And
yes.
I did. I bet 40 to 1. I thought it was a fair number. I thought that there was a very likely universe where Clanton opened at 25. I think he's that good.
Totally agree. I was kind of almost stunned. I get a message from one of our subscribers in Discord I'd kind of given them the list. Like, here's who I'm looking at. It moved in like the 30 minutes before I saw the message because there was 50s at Open.
Missed those. Yeah.
So I get the 42, very excited about the 40. Again, a little FOMO with the 50, knowing that it's out there. But again, 40, I was with you. I thought maybe 25, 28.
Yeah.
It would have been a difficult discussion because I probably would have only taken 2 of the 3 with Henley, Keegan, and Clanton south of 30. So love seeing the 40.
Here's the thing with Clanton too. reminds me a lot of Ludwig at the RSM,
Mm,
where I will be
okay.
honest about Clanton. Like, I think in the future, the golf courses that Clanton is going to have his biggest advantage of at are golf courses like Muirfield
Farmers.
Village and Bay Hill and Torrey Pines, because he is such a great total driver of the golf ball. I mean, his comp, in my opinion, is, you're going to want to play Clanton at the golf courses that Victor Hovland has played well at in the past, right? Because the weakest part of Clanton's game at the moment is short game. And so, again, windy conditions, if you give a bump in the wind to driving may matter a little bit more, and short game may matter a little bit more. I still think that's like a net positive for Clanton, because he's a phenomenal driver and he doesn't have a good short game. And I think driving's still going to be a little bit more important than short game this week. So
Yep.
at bare minimum, the windier conditions are a net neutral or a net positive for you. I like him more in a tougher tee to green test than I do in a pure putting contest. And I just think that these guys, they don't necessarily wait anymore, right? Like I don't think Ludwig didn't need to wait to win at the perfect golf course for his
Yep.
skill set, right? And we've already seen, I mean, the fact that Clanton has already top fived at the RSM Classic and Wyndham, which are two of the strongest comp courses to Waialae, like middle iron play. He's a phenomenal middle iron player.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
So, I saw the 40 and I said to myself, 25, I don't know, but at 40 to 1, I mean, is there a player in this field, Ryan, that just, if you played this tournament in 3 months with the exact same field and the exact same golf course, and based on how we feel about these players in 3 months from now versus how we feel about them now, is there a player in this field that you would feel more comfortable about the possibility that 3 months from now, this is just a 25 to 1 guy?
That's a great question. And it's a slam dunk that it's him. There's another guy that's probably significantly shorter. But he also is probably not 25, right? Unless he rolls off of a couple of wins. He's also on my card. It's also another guy that subscribers know that I will go to the well on.
Is it a young guy?
It's a young guy.
Thor?
Yes.
Me too. So, okay.
Andy 90. I took a 90 with 6 positions, 6 each way positions.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's a really bad number. Like that's,
right. Listen, I feel like, okay, so it seems like we're pretty similar.
We're gelling here.
Because
Sony vibes are strong.
Don't let me forget about the point that I want to make on Henley too before we finish, because I'm a big Henley guy this week too. I think it's a good thing though, because I was looking back. I think the last time you joined me on the pod was 3M Open, where I don't know if you joined me on this, but I had a big Vegas ticket that week. So maybe
I only had Vegas top 10.
Okay, but I know that like we talked, on the pod, that was a big. So okay, yeah, that's good. The good vibes are flowing from us. I totally agree on the Thor thing. I bet him 100 to 1 on Bet Rivers. Like,
nice.
I don't think he maybe is quite at the driving level that Clanton is, but he's a much better short game than Clanton, and he might be a better putter than Clanton too. Yep. And again, 8th at the RSM Classic, top 5 at the John Deere. Like, these guys, they're not necessarily going to wait. They're not going to wait. It's a different breed out there.
1000%. So yeah, it kind of flies in the face of, I think maybe a trend that's kind of going by the wayside a little bit, but a little bit of either course history here, or you played in the Sony before. I think Justin Ray had a nugget where it's like, I think it was last year's like 8 of the last 10 winners, had played the week prior. They're like, make the cut rate is like north of 80% as well. So there's probably something to that, but I don't think this course has like, the greens of Augusta where you're like, oh, I need to get more reps. I think it's probably just where it is in the schedule more so than anything like that. So, I'm not super worried about the fact that these are young guys that don't have a ton of walleye reps per se. So yeah, Thor at 90. I love the 100. I like the each way positions just in case too. The other one in the middle there, right around, it's another guy that I love too is Austin Eckroat. I played Eckroat at 45. Yeah. So that's my 5-man card. It doesn't take much for Eckroat for me, but when you think of keep the ball in play, strong, mid-iron play. We know that we've seen, him win a couple of times already.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you could push back and be like, hey, is Eckroat a 3-time winner in the last 18 months or so?
Brian
Maybe not.
already did. That was his.
Okay.
Yeah. He was like, is Eckroat going to win 3 times in the first 12 months of his career? And I don't know the answer to that, but thinking that, like, one of the reasons why is like Hideki just won. There's all of these guys that are so due. Cantlay is so due. Morikawa is so due. And then, of course, it's the one guy that won at the FedEx Cup playoffs that ends up getting another one to start the season. So,
I understand that mentality. It just can't be. Well, for me, it's just not how I handicap.
You can't.
And I can't do that, right? You're like, it's just not the right way to go about it. So just track the data, the numbers that you like, price wise, and back them up. So those are my 5.
Yeah. So I with you on Eckroat. I'm probably between Eckroat and Siwoo for my final spot on the card. And then I just want to close the book on Henley too, because I want to do 10 minutes of football at the end. But the thing with Henley, and the reason why I feel comfortable betting on him 20-1 this week, first of all, Henley might be my most profitable golfer of the last 12 months, just because of how exposed I was to him at massive top 10 numbers and low DraftKings prices at the US Open and the Open Championship. Right. And the other piece about Henley is, again, I said this on a show I just did, and I don't want this to be confused with me telling you that Russell Henley is, going to win majors like Xander Schauffele. But you look at somebody like Xander Schauffele, where it's like, okay, what is something that everyone can agree on with Xander Schauffele? The data says that this guy is one of the most well-rounded players in the world, right? And whether you want to invest in him in the outright market every week, you either have your guys that are just going to keep doing it, or your guys that are just going to say, hey, never going to be for me. Yeah. And by the time that Xander paid off, and got and realized his potential that his data always said was there, I had hopped off by then. I certainly wasn't betting him at 14-1 at majors, but you look back on it and it's like, this was the most obvious data thing of all time. Now, when it's going to come to fruition, your guess is as good as mine. And that's kind of how I feel about Russell Henley, right? Where it's like, this guy's been in the top 10 of data golf for a year. Okay. Anyone with the most elementary basic understanding of data is going to be like, Russell Henley is really, really good. Now, when he wins, whether or not he's going to win, man, your guess is as good as mine. But if you look at it like a long-term investment, the way that some people would maybe with Xander, and like at the end of the day, the guys that really hung around, and I was not one of them, the guys that really hung around with Xander for Valhalla and for Troon were some of just like the most hardcore data. I don't care about the narrative of him being a loser. This guy from a data perspective is the real fucking deal. And that's the Russell Henley case, right? Like, if your opinion on Russell Henley is this guy is a loser, I'm never going to bet him, I hear you. I'm not, the guy's choked when I've had money on him. I'm not going to argue with him that at all. But if you think that this guy is what the data is showing, then it's going to happen. Now, is it going to happen in the same way as Xander, where he wins 2 majors, or is it more likely going to happen where he finally wins a Sony Open and maybe wins like a signature event at, say, Pebble Beach, and then has another top 10 or 2 in a major, right? Maybe that's the Russell Henley happy end to this story. But from a data perspective, the case to me is fairly impeachable.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's the right way to look at things, because we can't pick and choose when we trust it. We can't talk about like, we rely so heavily on the data to help lead us to the right spots, and then just kind of cross a line out on a guy because he didn't win. It's closing golf tournaments is very, very hard. So yeah, I think how you finish that up is perfect too. Right, it might not be where he adds 12 miles per hour on his ball speed, and all of a sudden he's going to go out and he's one of the top drivers of the golf ball in the world. But he's not. He's kind of in that like middle range of age. He's not young, but he's definitely not old. He's not an old guy in the tour, so it's not like we can't expect him to get better as long as he maintains and doesn't lose and fall off distance wise. So the rest of it, like these guys they're not always finished products. Even the really good ones like Xander can take steps forward and learn how to close and learn how to win. I think little things narrative wise, like being a part of team events and feel like you belong. You feel like you have a little bit more confidence in those bigger moments when you get on a bigger stage because you're kind of used to it. And I think those reps probably really help a Russell Henley. So yeah, I mean, when it fits, I'm willing to pay the price because what ends up mattering, the most sticky stats, regardless of where we're at, are some of these ball striking, iron approach
play.
Keep the ball in play off the tee and approach. And he has it in spades. And it's just something that I want to continue to lean on. I feel like a fraud to lean on Dana and then not be like, yeah, I have to cross a line through Russell Henley because Hideki chased him down.
Totally agree. Okay, let's finish up with 10 minutes of football. You're a pretty big football bettor, right? I mean, I've never really talked football with you, but you're pretty big in the props market, right? I talk more football with Andy from time to time, and I'm a big fan of the bets. I don't know if you're involved with this at all, but the Betsperts deep dive pod, I listen to every week with Andy and Drew. I love those guys. That's like one of my favorite football pods. And I'm a huge NFL bettor myself, although you're more of a prop guy. I'm really heavy into against the spread and over unders. I don't dive as deep with you into the props. So how are you approaching Wildcard Weekend? Give me some macro takes, maybe kind of your favorite game on the board that you'll be attacking or what you're most looking forward to.
Yeah, I don't bet sides and totals as much, but I do bet sides and totals. I like to get either harder you can do in the playoffs, but I like look ahead lines because I feel like it's almost a double handicap. Whereas if I feel like I have a really good sense of what's going to happen in the current week, it's almost like parlaying my handicap in a sense. Is that I'm going to beat the closing line for the following week, and I think really when you're betting NFL sides,
that's it.
Right. You're going to win more times than not if you can beat the closing line.
Yes.
So that's a big piece of it. So I think there's something to that for, people trying to get into sides and totals a little bit more. The reality is it's the sharpest market that's out there. It's the most popular market. So beating it long-term is really hard to do. But yeah, I mean, we've done Move the Line, our football betting podcast, the 4 for 4 this was year 7, still going. We have a prop show as well. Cause I think props are more beatable. Even though like sometimes limits can be hard and that becomes a game within the game is finding out ways to have liquidity to make sure that it's worth your time. But a playoffs I'm stoked for. I think the one line that jumps out at me that I think is an overreaction to last night's game, which is I still think fantastic football, even though it wasn't what we expected there. I love Minnesota less than 3 against the Rams. 2.5 at open. I've seen some 1.5s today. I think it is a market overcorrection. I don't even think that makes sense from a power rating standpoint. I think it's probably just some early money coming down on confirmation bias for what we saw last time. Now, again, they did meet up early in the season. There was that late no call where Sam Darnold was face masked, in the end zone and didn't get that away. But I think we've continued to see them evolve a little bit defensively. I think the offense has found a groove there as well. And there are times where that Rams offense can really, really stall out. And it's really hard to run the football in Minnesota. Again, if you are able to divorce yourself from what you saw, Gibbs do last night, Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of a freak show. But if you look at any sort of success rate, EPA, yards per carry, even attempts, the way that teams skew pass heavy against Minnesota because they've had a really hard time running the football against them. They blitz a ton, but a lot of teams play man behind blitz. Minnesota plays a zone heavy scheme behind that. And that lends itself to them being able to crash lanes in a different way, run support with 3. They use just basically 1 linebacker and they use a lot of heavy safety stuff. Really unique defense, which I absolutely love. A lot of my props even on the defensive side because I think it's where there's an edge to be had. But Minnesota less than 3. Probably my favorite bet there on the board. I think, you know, the Bills are in a nice teaser range. If you want to be able to, you know, through the 7 through the 3 at 8.5, you can get them, you know,
Oh
down
yeah,
to 2.5.
that's down to 8.5. So yes, that's teaser friendly now, which
Beautiful.
yeah, which surprised me a little bit because you look at like I do my own NFL modeling. It's not as advanced as my golf modeling, but I do pretty well for myself. And I
Nice.
made every single one of these bigger spreads basically 7.5. So like Baltimore, Pittsburgh, I have that as 7.5. Denver, Buffalo, I have that as like 7.7. Um, and then what's the okay, those are the only two big ones. And then
Yeah.
I saw them open, you know, basically immediately get shot up to 9.5, 10. And I was like looking, I was saying to myself, okay, this just has to be teaser protection because, you know, Baltimore Buffalo is like the most
Oh
obvious
yeah.
Bill Simmons, you know, teaser that you'll ever find on the board. And this has to be a massive, massive protection
Yeah.
against all of the teasers that you're going to see come in. And by the way, teasers tend to be fairly profitable in the playoffs because, as you mentioned, the lines are really, really sharp. So, like, for example, I would never dream of teasing. I'm not, you know, EV is not to tease over unders in the playoffs. And I'm not even a huge teaser of games in the regular season, but these lines are so, so sharp that a lot of these games, both in terms of point spread and in terms of how many points scored, they're just the sharpest totals on the board. So I kind of always look at it like Pittsburgh, for example, you know, maybe there's some value on the 10 when that line really should be 7.5. Maybe there's some value on the underdog there too. The fact that that Buffalo now is teaserable where you can get it through that 3. I wonder what that's saying to me, that they're saying, "Hey, you can tease this now and get it through the 3."
We don't mind it. Yeah, I think you saw that too with the maybe even some of the movement that you saw. It's back and forth in some of the other games that are hovering around 2.5 and 3 as well. I think they
Yeah.
probably want to protect themselves early from some of that stuff. So yeah, it's that one's surprising to me. Pittsburgh, I'm with you. Like I think if you're probably like originating, you're probably south of this number. It's probably Pittsburgh or nothing for you, which makes sense. It's not a bet that I can make. But I understand why, you know, that's a stay away. We don't have to bet on all of them. Definitely. And again, that's another reason why there are prop angles. Like, oh, I want to have action on the game, even though I don't have a side. From a total standpoint, I love team totals. I don't know if that's
Yep.
something you dabble in.
Yes. Yeah.
Team totals are my favorite way to you know, bet game outcomes or in this range because there's some key numbers that I think really matter, and you can get on the right side of key numbers in these scenarios where, you know, under on a 17.5 or over on a 22.5. And because just the distribution of scores, they're going to be more likely to be in the 23, 24 range. You don't have a lot of scores ending at, you know, 22, kind of a dead number. So you can find some edges because they're not always, books are sharpened to this a little bit over the last handful of years. I used to write an article about it, and I think they used to just solely be derived, like it would make sense, off of the total of the game and the spread. But you've seen books now adjust to make sure they're covering key numbers. So even though it's not a perfect derivative of total and spread because they're trying to cover key numbers. So if you could shop around at times, even, you know, I don't mind, you know, if you're going to take it down to like a 115, 120 to maybe buy a little bit to get yourself on the right side of a key number on a total. I think that makes some sense. So that's something I want to do later this evening. Get into some of the, I'm doing some of my, you know, prop homework and stuff like that. I'm going to look at team totals as well.
And I would say, tell me if you think I'm off based on this, but my favorite total of the week is Baltimore Pittsburgh under. And I genuinely think that if you are betting Pittsburgh in that game, you should almost certainly parlay it or have some exposure to the under, because in
Yes.
my opinion, the only way that Pittsburgh covers that spread is if their defense has one of their best performances of the year, in my opinion. Now, the game can still also, and this is one of the reasons why I really like the under, the game can also still easily fly under the total if the Ravens win 27-3, which I
Correct.
have to say is in the range of outcomes. Like I think I bet the Pittsburgh plus 10. I think that Pittsburgh is going to put up a bit more of a fight, but like it is 100% in the range of outcomes that Baltimore wins this game 23-3. I actually personally think that Baltimore is not super incentivized to run up the score in this game, and they may want to save some of the, particularly with Zay Flowers. I'm not sure if he's going to play.
Yeah.
I think Baltimore may really want to save a lot of their best stuff for that Buffalo game. And I think a very likely outcome of this game is like Baltimore 20-10 or Baltimore 27-13, something like that, where you're getting that under 45 number. Are you seeing that in the Baltimore Pittsburgh game, or do you think I should be a little more open to the fact that maybe the Pittsburgh offense can get going, and what is stopping the Ravens from putting up 40 on this in this one?
No, I mean, that would be kind of the way I would look at it too. Like I said, I think that it's not a number that I'm jumping at, but yeah, when you look at 44.5, it's a key number. So being, getting under on that, I think is the right way to do it. Because there are scenarios where the Ravens go over their team total, but the game still goes under because the Steelers are drastically under their own. So that's a scenario where I think it's in the range of outcomes. This game in general, they've always been, looking at like historical team matchups, I think is just kind of real noisy.
I'm lukewarm on that. I'm not. My reason for betting this game is not that, oh my God, divisional game, Ravens, Steelers. I'm looking
because something happened in 2018 between.
Yeah, I'm looking at who these teams are today, what they've been doing over the past couple of months, and what I expect to see based on the current iterations of their offense and defense.
Yeah, and less of a ceiling. You make a call out with the Zay Flower stuff too. Less of a ceiling, obviously, with the offense. I'm interested in Zay props in games where they get pushed, because anytime that they're in a game where they have to lean a little bit more pass heavy, Zay kind of pops. I don't think that this is the week, especially coming off of a knee injury. So Pittsburgh's defense is just, to me, a little bit overrated. Yes, they have edge rushing trio that can get home. Cam Hayward is fine. Joey Porter's had a little bit of a down year. I liked Corey Trice coming out of college. Purdue, poor guy, got put on an island, filling in for Dante Jackson this past week, which wasn't really fair to watch him get cooked by Jamar Chase over and over again, because I think he might be an okay player down the road. But I think it's just, this is a defense that good offenses can exploit. And I think that's kind of what the Ravens are at this point. So Ravens team total over, or a game under, because he can even a little bit slightly hedge. But it's one of the ideal hedges because it's not like one or the other. You can win both bets.
Okay, we're going to finish with this. We're just going to go rapid fire, and I'm going to give a side or a total. You can, if you want to give a prop, you're welcome to do that, but let's just go through the games, just rapid fire. Don't have to explain yourself, but just one favorite bet for every single game, starting with Chargers Houston.
I'll lay the 2.5 with the Chargers. I think they're legit.
Yeah, that's it for me too. I would say I don't have a strong opinion on the over/under. I think 2.5 would be probably my favorite play in this game. Baltimore Pittsburgh, I already shared that. I'm feeling good. I got under 45.5. So now that's down to 43.5 or 44. But favorite bet in Baltimore Pittsburgh.
I see Steelers team total under.
Yeah, I like that. Denver, Buffalo. I will go with, gosh, I don't know if this is cheating, but it's probably teasing Buffalo down on an 8.5.
I don't think it's cheating. I think it's one of the best things in the board that you can grab right now.
Yeah. So teasing down for me in that game. What about you?
Yeah, through 7 through the 3, tease Buffalo for sure.
Yeah, Green Bay, Philly. I kind of like the points. Like I kind of like Philly. I mean, I kind of like Green Bay +5 here. My numbers have it 3.75. So I'm seeing a touch of value on the Packers, oddly enough, even though they have kind of limped to the finish line. Just at a giant macro level, I think this is maybe the only game where you could argue that the underdog has the better QB coach.
It's a good point. We also still have news today. Jalen Hurts still in concussion protocol, which is super encouraging. I don't know what's going on with that. Obviously some injuries on the Green Bay side too. Want to see what's going on with Quay Walker. Run defense for the Packers can be had. It's been even worse with Quay out of the lineup. they end up having to, really support with their safeties in a different way that can leave them vulnerable to some big plays. So, Saquon longest rush, or just, alt on Saquon ladders for him to have an explosive day. Cause either way, you're probably going to have a Hurts that is either less than 100% or this guy just doesn't have a lot of high level reps over the last month or so. So, Saquon rushing stuff, chalky as it is probably a good spot in this matchup.
Tampa Bay, Washington. I bet the Bucks -3. I'm kind of in on Baker. I'm kind of a Baker buyer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you, I mean, his numbers have been really good, but even just like eye test, like I like the way that team plays for him. I think he's a leader of men, and I think that he has the ability to, at the very minimum, win a first playoff game. You're going to get the classic rookie QB in their first playoff start, but I think the Bucks are probably the side there in my opinion.
Yeah, I like the 2.5s that were there a little bit earlier too. But I mean, the Tampa Bay side is probably the right side. My favorite bet, I don't have the number on it yet because they don't. It's not posted. We just haven't seen a lot of games. When you think about the Commanders' schedule this season, they weren't really challenged. That was the hole to punch in them early in the season because they played a super soft schedule. But then we had these games where they were either trailing or pushed, and we saw basically jailbreak Jane Daniels from a rushing standpoint. So Jane Daniels typically rushing prop line is in like the upper 40s. I think anything south of 50, I'm taking over on Jane Daniels rushing. So Tampa Bay is going to blitz a ton too. Todd Bowles loves to do that. They have a ton of injuries in the secondary too. They need to hide some of that. So, forcing a guy to scramble a little bit more. Again, longest rush, overruns rushing yards, Jane Daniels.
Final game. This is one of those tough ones for me where the line is exactly, actually, I had Minnesota -2.2. So maybe you're getting a touch. This is one of those games where it's like, I'm either going to bet Minnesota money line or tease the Rams up. Like it's a trickier one for me. I'm going to go with Minnesota money line because I already think, gun to my head, that's the team that I think is ultimately going to win the game. And seeing you give the added sell on Minnesota as one of your favorite signs. Let's ride with the Vikings. Let's ride with the ranking. This game's -3 if, right? This game's -3 if they, even like lose on the last second to the Lions. I think it's almost -3, right?
I think it's like 3.25 where you might see some like juicy 3.5 even.
Yeah.
I really do. Like, I just, it's kind of seller on the Rams all season long. Again, quarterback coach, there's a win for them and that basic metric. A lot of times, no matter who they're playing against, but I think there's just a lot of flaws in that defense that could be, picked apart. And the Vikings are a good football team. So Vikings to win, I'll lay the 1.5 money line, however you want to get down.
Yeah. I don't even is this version of Stafford definitively better than Darnold?
That's a good question. I don't think so.
Yeah. It's an argument at the very least. It's my take. Yeah. And Kevin O'Connell's probably the coach of the year, right? He's probably winning.
I think deservedly so. Yeah.
I agree with that. Ryan Noonan, this was a blast, man. We've talked a bunch about Betsperts, but anything else you got to plug before we get out of here?
Oh, betspertsgolf.com. Come over, use the promo code here, Inside Golf, to get 25% off of the rabbit hole. It's the best way to do it. Highly recommend it. And if you have any questions, you reach out directly. Like Andy said, user feedback is something that we take very seriously. If you have questions using it, there are tutorials on the site, but obviously, again, I don't mean this in like a condescending way. I'm like willing to hold your hand and walk you through it because we want to make sure it's something that you learn the value of.
The tutorials are really good. I like watching them myself, and same goes for me. Like we're here to help. The interactive part of it, and the educational part of it, I think is one of the coolest things that we should both be pretty proud of. So thanks for joining me, Ryan. This is a blast. Cheers, buddy.
Thanks, buddy.